My name is Macy. I come from what many would consider a typical family. A mother, a father, and my older sister Deborah, who is 6 years older than I am. That age gap set the tone for our family dynamics. Growing up, our home felt like a museum dedicated to Deborah's milestones, her first smile, her first steps, and her early drawings, which my parents adored and displayed like masterpieces. In contrast, I seemed to blend into the background, wearing Deborah's hand-me-downs and playing with her discarded toys. It wasn't the ideal situation, but I didn't know any different. I learned early on to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention to myself. As time passed, this pattern persisted. Deborah received new clothes and toys, while I got her leftovers. Yet, I never voiced any complaints. I simply existed. High school came and went, and Deborah moved out to attend college on a scholarship. I hoped that might turn my parents' attention my way, but their focus remained fixed on Deborah's college experiences, her new boyfriend, and her burgeoning future. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Deborah returned home bursting with excitement, announcing her engagement. The reaction from my parents was as if she had achieved something monumental. Tears, cheers, and laughter filled the room, and amidst it all, Deborah turned to me, her eyes sparkling, asking if I'd be her bridesmaid. I nodded and mustered a smile, though inside I felt overlooked as usual. Deborah's wedding preparations became a family affair marked by grandeur and financial strain. My parents even considered taking out a loan to cover the costs. I overheard them one evening, their voices laden with stress, yet resolved to support Deborah's big day. I felt a pang of injustice, but kept my opinions to myself, as they seemed to carry little weight. The wedding itself was extravagant. Deborah was the radiant center of attention, and our parents glowed with pride. There, in my bridesmaid dress, I felt more invisible than ever. After returning from her honeymoon, Deborah announced her decision to become a housewife, since her husband's income was sufficient for them both. Despite the financial burden they'd already shouldered for her wedding, our parents simply smiled and supported her choice. My frustrations simmered silently. Not long after, Deborah revealed she was expecting twins. Our parents were overjoyed and began planning to help them buy a larger home for their expanding family. When they talked about making a down payment on a house, despite the existing wedding debt, I couldn't hold back any longer. I finally spoke up, questioning their decisions amidst our financial realities. Growing up in Deborah's shadow, I always felt like an afterthought in my own family's narrative. My voice, often muted by the louder storylines around me, struggled to find its place. But in that moment of dissent, I realized the weight of my presence and the need to advocate for myself, even if it meant challenging the family norms that had so long defined us. And so I proposed buying them a house. They both glanced at me, seeming to have forgotten I was even present. Perhaps they truly had. "Macy," Mom spoke up firmly, "this is what families do. We support one another." Not long after, the twins arrived, two delightful little boys who were the apple of everyone's eye. Mom and Dad were ecstatic, spending every possible moment at Deborah's new place, doting on the infants. Meanwhile, I was wrapping up high school, pondering over what came next. College seemed the natural path, but funding it was the real puzzle. One evening, I gathered the nerve to discuss college finances with my parents. "I've been exploring colleges," I initiated. "That's nice, dear," Mom replied, distracted by the twins' photo album she was assembling. "Could you guys possibly help with the tuition?" I asked tentatively. They exchanged that familiar, uncomfortable look, the one that suggested they wished to discuss anything but this. "Well, honey," Dad began reluctantly, "we'd love to support you. But after the wedding loan for Deborah and the down payment for her house, we can only cover half." Mom quickly added, "You'll have to manage the rest on your own." I felt a profound sense of disappointment. They could only offer half after all they'd done for Deborah. Resigned, I thanked them quietly and retreated to my room. Behind a closed door, I allowed myself to cry for the first time in years. I enrolled in the local community college, not my first choice, but the only option feasible with the limited financial help. To bridge the gap, I took a part-time job at a diner. Balancing work and studies was a relentless challenge. I returned home exhausted nightly, longing for sleep that was too often interrupted. On Friday, after an especially tough shift, all I craved was my bed. But as I entered, there was Deborah in the living room, the twins in tow. "Oh, Macy, you're a lifesaver," she sighed, rushing out for a date night before I could protest, leaving me with her restless toddlers. "What the—" I muttered, feeling overwhelmed. I cherish my nephews, but this wasn't my responsibility. Mom appeared, justifying. "Your sister's worn out, Macy. This is family. Plus, it's good practice for when you have your own kids." This pattern persisted. Every weekend, Deborah would appear, leave the twins, and vanish. Sometimes she ran errands, other times it was a movie or dinner out. Each time, I was left to babysit. Finally, after a brutal exam week, I reached my breaking point. "This isn't fair," I protested to my parents. "I'm exhausted from work and school, and now my weekends too?" Dad didn't even glance up from his newspaper. "Macy, your sister needs the support. You should be happy to help, but what about what I need?" I protested, feeling worn thin from the relentless pace of my life. Mom sighed heavily. "Macy, don't be selfish. Deborah has 2 children to manage. You don't understand how tough that is." It was evident they weren't going to take my concerns seriously, so I resigned myself to the role they had imposed on me, attending classes by day, working at the diner in the evenings, and serving as an unpaid babysitter during the weekends. Any notion of a personal life was laughable. The extent of my social interactions was the brief chats with customers. Romantic dates were a distant fantasy. I barely had a moment to myself, let alone time to meet someone new. I was nearing my breaking point. Juggling work, school, and unsolicited babysitting duties had left me utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. I desperately needed a real break, away from every demand and expectation. So I made a decision. One evening, I declared to my parents, "I'm taking a few days off. I'm going to the beach." To my surprise, they responded positively. "That's wonderful, Macy," Mom exclaimed, genuinely pleased. "Where are you going?" I shared details about a modest motel I had found online by the ocean. It was simple and affordable. Dad nodded in approval. "Good for you, kiddo. You deserve a break." Their support was so unexpected it nearly knocked me off my feet. Could it be that they were finally recognizing my needs? The day of my departure arrived, and I felt a palpable sense of relief as I boarded the bus, the weight of my responsibilities diminishing with each mile. When I reached the coast, the sight of the rundown motel didn't dampen my spirits. The ocean view was breathtaking. I dropped off my bag and headed straight to the beach. The salty breeze was invigorating, clearing my mind. I enjoyed a leisurely lunch at a quaint seaside cafe, relishing the quiet and the rhythmic sound of the waves. As the sun began to set, I walked back to the motel, planning a peaceful evening alone. However, as I neared my room, the sound of familiar voices stopped me in my tracks. There, outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Deborah, with the twins racing around them. "Surprise, Macy." My heart sank. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my disappointment evident. "We couldn't let you be all alone on your vacation," Mom said cheerily. "So we decided to join you. We're right next door." I noticed their suitcases outside one of the nicer rooms. They had obviously chosen a more expensive option for themselves. Before I could react, Deborah was pushing the twins towards me. "The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you?" "I want to take a walk on the beach, and I need to run to the store," Mom added. Just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing there with 2 hyperactive 4-year-olds. What was meant to be a rejuvenating getaway turned into a nightmare. The twins were unruly, turning my modest room into a disaster area. They tore curtains, broke glasses, and managed to clog the toilet with toys, leaving me to handle the aftermath and unexpected expenses. By the end of what was supposed to be my vacation, I was even more exhausted than before, a stark reminder that my needs were still an afterthought to my family. But I was more content than ever before. The final breaking point came when Deborah complained about being tired from the trip. That was too much. The argument that erupted was monumental. I shouted, Mom wept, Deborah became defensive, and the twins wailed through it all. That night, I packed and caught the first bus home at dawn. Watching the coastline vanish, I sensed a pivotal shift within me. I couldn't let this pattern continue. Dragged down by exhaustion, I entered through the front door. Dad was in his usual spot, glued to the TV, offering barely a grunt as I passed. Collapsing into bed, my mind spun with turbulent emotions and budding resolutions. By morning, clarity had formed. I was leaving. I was midway through packing when the door slammed shut. Mom's voice, sharp and fraught, echoed through the house. Macy, where are you? She found me in my room, her face flushed with anger. I can't believe you just left us there. Do you know how hard it was to handle the twins by ourselves? I nearly retorted about my constant solo babysitting, but chose silence instead. What are you doing? She demanded, eyes narrowing. I'm moving out, I stated, more composed than I felt. I need my own space, my own life. Their reactions were swift, and as expected. How can you be so selfish? Mom cried. After all we've done for you. Dad's face reddened with fury. You ungrateful girl. What about your sister? Who will help her with the twins? That was the last straw. My sister? What about me? When has anyone in this family ever considered what I need? I challenged. Mom gasped. Deborah has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my life. If you leave, don't expect any more financial support for college. You'll be completely on your own, Dad growled. I faced them, seeing them as if for the first time, not just as my parents but as individuals oblivious to my needs. Fine, I said, zipping up my suitcase. I'd rather be on my own than continue living like this. No personal life, no time to myself, just endless demands and nonstop chaos. I'm done. I pushed past them, suitcase in tow, their protests echoing behind me. As I reached the door, Mom's voice pierced the turmoil. If you leave now, don't bother coming back. I paused, hand on the doorknob, then without a backward glance, stepped into a new beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I crashed on a classmate's couch while I searched for a stable living situation. Soon, I found a potential roommate for my study group. We secured a modest apartment, barely affordable but ours. Cut off financially, I picked up extra shifts at the diner, balancing work and school. There were nights I doubted my endurance, overwhelmed by fatigue. Yet, for the first time, I experienced true freedom. No demands, no guilt trips over babysitting, no putting everyone else's needs before my own. The apartment was humble, my bed just a mattress on the floor, but it was a sanctuary. Here, I began to rebuild my life, finally prioritizing myself. I committed myself entirely to my studies, driven by an intensity that surprised even me. Countless sleepless nights, missed gatherings, and extra shifts were all sacrifices made in pursuit of my dream. Before I realized it, 3 years flew by, and there I was at graduation, scanning the crowd for any familiar faces, my parents or my sister Deborah. Sadly, the seats I'd reserved remained vacant. After college, life shifted dramatically. I secured a position at a marketing firm, and for the first time, I wasn't just scraping by. I had a steady income. I rented an apartment of my own, modest, but mine alone, free from roommates and family drama. It felt like a breath of fresh air. I began to enjoy simple pleasures, going on dates, making new friends, and experiencing casual relationships. Though these were lighthearted, they brought joy to my previously overburdened life. My relationship with my parents, however, was strained. We spoke infrequently, our conversations filled with awkward pauses and subtle disapproval, mainly because they hadn't approved of my decision to move out. When my 27th birthday approached, my mom, unusually upbeat, invited me to celebrate at home with the entire family. Against my better judgment, I accepted. Arriving at my parents' home was like traveling back in time. My sister Deborah, her husband, and their energetic 6-year-old twins were there, along with various aunts, uncles, and cousins, all greeting me warmly. While I managed a polite smile and accepted their gifts, the atmosphere changed when my mom presented me with a grand gesture, an envelope containing a ticket to a beach resort for a family vacation. I felt trapped. Memories of past obligations flooded back, reminding me of lost personal time due to family commitments. At the party's end, with just the immediate family left, I couldn't hold back any longer. I declared firmly that I wouldn't go, igniting a flurry of emotions and accusations of not caring about the family. Despite the intense pressure and guilt-tripping, I relented, exhausted, agreeing to go. As the departure day arrived, surrounded by my overly enthusiastic family at the airport, I realized they were unaware of the reservations I still harbored about this trip. They thought they had won, but I knew this vacation would be a test of my patience and boundaries with my family. As I sat with my family in the bustling airport, my sister Deborah cheerfully laid out the plans for the vacation. "You'll have such fun with the boys, Aunt Macy," she said with a wink, suggesting beach days, sandcastles, and snorkeling. Our parents shared her enthusiasm, expressing how wonderful it would be for Deborah to have a break. Yet, throughout their excited chatter, not once did anyone consider what I might want from the vacation. It was clear they all viewed me merely as a convenient babysitter. When we neared the check-in counter, I seized my opportunity. "Oh," I exclaimed, feigning discomfort. "I need to use the restroom. You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, preoccupied with their luggage and the excited children. As they joined the line, I turned and briskly walked the other way. My heart raced as I approached a different airline counter, where I presented my passport and a ticket I had secretly purchased weeks before, a ticket to a small, serene island resort. Once through security, I found a secluded spot and pulled out my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I composed a message to my mother. "I'm not going on the family vacation. I've planned my trip. Enjoy yours." I sent the message and turned off my phone, bracing myself for the inevitable backlash. As I boarded the plane to my chosen destination, I briefly turned on my phone, which immediately flooded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, and texts filled with anger and disbelief. I listened to a voicemail from my mother, her voice shrill and furious, berating me for ruining the family plans and calling me selfish and ungrateful. As the plane lifted off, I sipped my champagne and stared out the window. Despite a knot of guilt in my stomach, a profound sense of freedom overwhelmed me. I knew the fallout would come: angry calls, tearful accusations, and more labels of selfishness. Yet I felt light, liberated to breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. This trip was solely for me. No babysitting, no family obligations, just relaxation and self-indulgence. Landing on the tropical island, the warm breeze greeted me like a breath of fresh air, whispering of new beginnings. I checked into a quaint, charming resort by the beach and settled in. Curiosity eventually compelled me to check my phone again, which was still bombarded with furious messages. With a mix of amusement and relief, I scrolled through the accusations of selfishness from my family. For once, I had chosen my own needs over their demands. I switched off the phone, locked it in the hotel safe, and decided I would be unreachable for the duration of my stay. What a glorious week it was. I relaxed on the beach, read uninterrupted, tried snorkeling, and even took up surfing. I mingled with other vacationers, enjoyed spontaneous dates, and reveled in the freedom of staying out late. No schedules, no responsibilities, and no obligations, just me, the ocean, and whatever adventure I decided to embrace next. After a rejuvenating day listening to the soothing sounds of the sea, I returned to my urban sanctuary more relaxed than I had been in a long while. This newfound serenity, however, was disrupted the following morning by a vehement knocking at my door. Upon opening it, I was met with the angry faces of my mother and sister, their expressions fraught with outrage. "You've gone too far this time," my mother exclaimed as she barged in without waiting for an invitation. Deborah followed closely behind, her voice sharp with reprimand. "You've completely spoiled our family trip." The children were utterly disappointed. They continued in this vein, bombarding me with grievances. According to them, I was inconsiderate, neglectful, and a disappointment as both a daughter and a sister. They insisted I was indebted to them for the holiday expenses and for neglecting my babysitting duties. I allowed them a moment to air their frustrations, their bitter words floating around me, yet not settling. When I sensed a pause, I interjected firmly. Enough. My tone was clear and resolute. I owe you nothing. Not for the trip, not for childcare, not for my time. I am my person, entitled to make my own choices. My mother attempted to interject, but I stopped her with a gesture. This conversation is over. You may leave now. We can speak again when you're ready to approach me with respect and discuss things calmly. Until then, it's better if we don't talk. Their expressions registered shock at my decisiveness. After a few more sharp words, they left in a huff. Closing the door behind them, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the confrontation but also a deep sense of rightness about standing up for myself. In the following weeks, I embraced change. I moved to a quieter part of the city, keeping my new address private for my family. I devoted myself more fully to my career and embraced hobbies that brought me joy and fulfillment, such as painting, practicing yoga, and beginning to learn a new language. There were challenging moments and times filled with self-doubt and guilt, but each time I returned to my serene home, made plans without the burden of family obligations, or explored a new interest, I felt reassured about my choices. The future between my family and me remains uncertain. There may come a time when reconciliation is possible, or perhaps it isn't in our cards. What is certain, though, is that I will face whatever comes, guided by my values and convictions, proudly forging the path I've chosen for my life.